All right, so are you ready for this? I feel like we're kind of walking into a fog here,
Yeah.
you know? We're not really sure what's ahead. Things are strangely quiet right now when it comes to U.S. Canada trade.
Yeah.
But trust me, this is the kind of quiet that makes you want to hold your breath.
Yeah. Definitely feels like there's some tension in the air. We just saw Donald Trump inaugurated for a second term as president. And, during the campaign, he talked a big game on trade, but his inauguration speech, surprisingly muted.
Muted, but not totally silent, though.
Yeah.
He still made it very clear that he plans to use tariffs to protect American interests.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know about you, but that instantly brought back memories of his threats toward Canada during his first term. Remember all that?
Oh, yeah.
25% tariffs on Canadian goods
Mm-hmm.
really sent shockwaves through both economies.
Exactly. And the thing is, even though there weren't any immediate, fireworks this time around, he did issue a presidential memo
Right.
directing agencies to re-examine trade policies, specifically the USMCA.
When that replaced NAFTA. Yep.
Exactly, and relationships with Canada, Mexico, and China.
Now, someone might think a policy review is standard procedure, right? But the timing here feels, I don't know, calculated.
Yeah.
Why bring this up now, especially with the USMCA review already scheduled for 2026?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Could be a power play. Maybe a way for Trump to signal that he's ready to renegotiate, potentially on his terms.
Yeah.
Remember, he has repeatedly claimed that the U.S. subsidizes Canada to the tune of like $200 billion annually through trade deficits and military spending.
Right.
It's clear he's looking for leverage.
And Canada's not exactly just sitting back and waiting, are they?
No, not at all.
Last time around, both the federal and provincial governments made it very clear they had countermeasures ready if those tariffs were to hit. So we've got this history of tension, a president who's shown that he's more than willing to play hardball, and now this memo.
Right.
It really does feel like the opening scene of a thriller.
It absolutely does. And to make things even more interesting, the memo also mentions that Phase 1 trade deal with China,
Right.
which seems to suggest that Trump's tough stance on Chinese trade practices is far from over.
Which, of course, brings up another layer of complexity for Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Because Trump's been pressuring both Canada and Mexico to limit China's role in their economies, particularly in the auto sector. So now Canada's caught in this geopolitical tug of war.
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? Trying to maintain those strong economic ties with both superpowers while navigating their, shall we say, increasingly fraught relationship. Not an easy position at all to be in.
And then there's this whole other element to all this that has me scratching my head. Trump's idea for an external revenue service.
Yes, it's a fascinating proposal, isn't it? A whole new agency dedicated to collecting tariff revenue. Really makes you wonder, is this a sign of more tariffs to come? Could this be a way for Trump to bypass Congress and act more unilaterally on trade? See, this is what I mean about the fog. Every step we take just reveals another twist, another layer of intrigue. And we're left with more questions than answers. Will those past tariff threats against Canada resurface? Is this memo just a warning shot? Or is this a prelude to something much bigger?
It's impossible to say for sure right now. But what we do know is that this seemingly quiet start to Trump's second term could be masking some serious undercurrents in U.S.-Canada relations. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for the economies involved, but for the very fabric of this long-standing partnership. And, this fog, like you said, it seems to be drifting over specific sectors of the Canadian economy. Like take the auto industry, for example. They're already struggling with global supply chain disruptions. And now this added uncertainty over U.S. trade policy, it's creating like a whole other level of anxiety. Yeah, it's like a storm brewing on the horizon. You can kind of see the dark clouds gathering, but you just don't know if it's going to be a light shower or a full-blown hurricane.
Right.
And that wait-and-see approach,
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be nerve-wracking for businesses trying to make long-term plans.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about big industries either.
Right.
Because remember, trade affects everyone. And if tariffs are imposed, those costs are often passed down to us, the consumers. So you could be looking at higher prices for everything, groceries, cars, you name it.
And let's not forget the impact on jobs.
Mm-hmm.
We saw during Trump's first term how quickly things can escalate. Trade wars have casualties. And very often, those casualties are everyday people, people who just find themselves caught in the crossfire.
It's sobering thought, for sure. And it highlights the need for, some clear-headed analysis and strategic thinking on the part of Canadian policymakers. What are the potential scenarios here? How can we mitigate the risks? What levers can we pull to protect Canadian interests?
Okay, so we've got this, fog of uncertainty, potential economic fallout, and a whole lot of questions.
Hmm.
But what can we actually do about it?
Well, for starters, we need to understand the playing field. Before NAFTA was replaced by the USMCA, there were already some major differences in how those agreements approached things, like dispute resolution, market access.
Okay, so back up for a second. I know we're supposed to be diving deep here, but could you maybe just remind us what were those key differences between NAFTA and the USMCA for those of us who haven't been, brushing up on our trade agreements lately?
Of course. Well, one of the most significant changes was the introduction of stricter rules for the auto industry. So the USMCA requires a higher percentage of a vehicle's components to be made in North America to qualify for duty-free trade. And this was a major win for the US.
Yeah.
They wanted to bring more manufacturing jobs back home.
So potentially good for American workers, but what about the ripple effect on Canadian auto parts suppliers and manufacturers?
Exactly. That's one of the big unknowns right now. How will these existing USMCA provisions intersect with, Trump's more aggressive trade tactics? Will Canada even be able to maintain its competitiveness in the auto sector under these new pressures?
See, this is what I find so fascinating and unnerving about this whole thing. It's like we're watching a chess game unfold, but we can only see half the board. We know the players, we know the pieces, but the strategy is completely shrouded in mystery.
And that makes it all the more important to, analyze the moves that have been made. We need to dissect Trump's past statements, his actions during his first term, look for patterns, clues as to what his endgame might be.
Right, because maybe this memo, just a negotiating tactic, maybe it's all bluster, a way to force Canada and Mexico back to the bargaining table.
Or maybe it's a sign of a much deeper shift in U.S. trade policy, a move away from multilateral agreements and towards a more unilateral protectionist approach.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, the implications for Canada could be really profound.
So we've got this intricate web of economic interests, political maneuvering, historical baggage, and right at the center of it all is this question. What does Donald Trump really want?
That is the question. And until we have a clearer answer, this fog of uncertainty, it's likely to linger. But one thing's for sure, the stakes are high. And the choices made in these coming weeks and months could have repercussions for years to come.
It's like we're trying to solve a riddle, a riddle that's wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. We've got all these different pieces of the puzzle, the memo, the past threats, the whole global context. But it's just really tough to see how it all fits together.
And that's what makes this whole thing so captivating, right? It's not just dry economic data or, policy jargon. This is about the relationship between two countries that share a border, a history, and completely intertwined economies.
It's personal. It really
Yeah.
feels like we're at a crossroads. One pass, maybe it leads to greater cooperation, maybe even a deepening of economic ties. But the other, well, it's a lot murkier.
Yeah, potentially a path toward more friction, more tit-for-tat retaliations, and an erosion of trust, the kind that could take years to rebuild. And, that's not just some abstract concern either. This has very real consequences for people on both sides of the border.
Right, because it's easy to get lost in the high-level politics of it all. But at the end of the day, this is about families,
Yeah.
businesses, communities, just trying to navigate all this uncertainty. What advice would you give them, right now? How can people prepare for these potential ripple effects?
Well, I think the first step is awareness. Don't just tune out the news because it seems complicated. Pay attention to how these trade tensions are evolving. What industries are being discussed? What potential countermeasures are being proposed?
Knowledge is power.
Right.
The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to make decisions, whether it's about your investments, your business, even just your day-to-day spending.
Exactly. And for businesses specifically, diversify wherever possible.
Yeah.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Explore alternative markets. Re-examine those supply chains. Just see where you can build in some flexibility.
It's like battening down the hatches before a storm, right?
Mm.
You might not know exactly how strong it'll be, but you want to be prepared, just in case.
And on a personal level, I think it's important to remember we've been through tough times before.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. Canada relationship has weathered its share of storms. This isn't the first trade dispute, and it certainly won't be the last.
So stay informed, stay flexible, and try not to panic. Easier said than done, I know. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Please do.
This fog of uncertainty that we keep talking about, it is unsettling, absolutely. But it also creates an opportunity to engage in these critical conversations, to challenge assumptions, to demand transparency from our leaders.
Because ultimately, the future of U.S.-Canada relations isn't just